Reality of Pahalgam attack. Imagine a honeymoon, meant to be joyous, ending in just unimaginable tragedy. A peaceful valley, suddenly a scene of terror.
Yeah, it's truly horrific.
What really happened in the Bisarin Valley near Pahalgam? Well, it's far more complex, much more disturbing than those initial headlines might suggest.
Definitely. There are layers to this.
Welcome to this deep dive. We're going to try and piece together the story of that recent attack on tourists in Kashmir.
We've looked at quite a range of sources, haven't we?
We have. News reports from all over: Al Jazeera, Reuters, BBC, CNN, Indian outlets like The Hindu, The Indian Express, NDTV, lots more. Plus survivor accounts, official statements.
Right, and even looking at it through a sort of social science lens to understand the broader context.
Exactly. Our aim here is to get beyond that initial shock, to give you a clearer, more nuanced understanding of the attack itself, the immediate aftermath, and, well, the bigger picture it fits into.
It's important work.
So stick with us, because the details that have come out, they're chilling and, frankly, crucial to understand.
So the attack itself, April 22nd, Bisarin Valley, near Pahalgam. Usually it's known for, well, beauty and peace, right? A major tourist draw.
Absolutely. Not a place you associate with this kind of violence.
But gunmen attacked. And in about, 25 to 30 minutes? It was over.
Leaving 26 people dead, a dozen injured. Just devastating.
And initially, yes, the reports highlighted that 25 victims were Hindu men.
Which is a significant detail, of course.
Hugely significant. But we also learned about the 26th victim, a Kashmiri Muslim man. He apparently tried to stop the attackers, tried to shield the others.
An act of incredible bravery. It really underscores, I think, the human complexity caught up in this. It wasn't just one group against another in that moment.
Precisely. And those survivor accounts, they paint a truly horrifying picture.
Targeted violence, wasn't it? That seems clear.
Yes. Witnesses reported the attackers specifically separating people, asking about their religion.
How? What were they asking?
Demanding names, asking people to recite Islamic verses, even physically checking for proof of faith, like circumcision.
My God. And those who couldn't prove it
were shot.
There were some specific chilling details, too. One woman apparently spared, but told to. What? Recount the horrors to Prime Minister Modi?
Yes, that was reported.
Yeah.
And a Christian man killed because he couldn't recite the Kalma.
But then a Hindu man who could recite it was spared.
According to some accounts, yes. It shows a kind of terrifying, arbitrary cruelty alongside the targeting.
And didn't they question one victim about Palestine? A Christian victim?
That was also reported. Questioned him about Palestine, then shot him, and then reports mentioned them taking selfies with the bodies. Utterly depraved.
Just unbelievable. And another victim from Andhra Pradesh simply shot for not answering Hindu Hai, Muslim Hai.
Are you Hindu or Muslim?
Yeah.
It shows a stark, brutal nature of the selection. These details, they're fragments, but they tell such a powerful story of deliberate, targeted killing.
And the religious targeting seems undeniable from these accounts, which, as you mentioned, became a point of discussion regarding some international media coverage later on.
It did. And the attack itself, the speed, the brutality, happening in roughly half an hour. They fired around 70 rounds.
From serious weapons, right, not just handguns.
Believed to be M4 carbines, AK-47s, sophisticated weapons. It suggests planning, intent.
And eyewitnesses mentioned teenagers possibly being among the attackers.
That's another disturbing element reported, yes. As another layer to who was involved.
And later reports, images, confirming execution-style killings.
Yes, reinforcing the absolute ruthlessness of the act.
So who's responsible? That was the immediate question.
Initially, a group called the Resistance Front, or TRF, claimed it. They're seen as an offshoot of Lashkar-e-Taiba, or LET, the LET.
LET having known links to Pakistan, of course.
Right. And TRF's stated reason was opposing, quote, non-local settlement in Kashmir.
Okay, so a claim was made. But then...
Then things got strange. TRF retracted the claim.
Retracted it? Why?
They alleged a communications breach. And then they actually accused Indian intelligence agencies of somehow being behind it, saying they'd do their own investigation.
That is highly unusual for a group like that, isn't it? To claim and then retract and blame the state.
Very unusual. It raises a lot of questions about what was going on internally with them or what external pressures might have been applied.
So despite the TRF retraction, where did the Indian investigation point?
Indian intelligence pointed towards Lashkar-e-Taiba, specifically the top commander named Saifullah Kazuri, also known as Khalid. They believe he was the mastermind.
And they think it involved multiple attackers.
The assessment was around 5 terrorists, with evidence suggesting at least 3 might have come from Pakistan.
Have they identified any suspects?
They released sketches of 3 men linked to Asif Fauji, Sulaiman Shah, and Abu Talha. And it's worth noting, the TRF itself is designated a terrorist organization under India's UAPA law.
Okay, so the picture from the Indian side points towards Lati, potentially with cross-border involvement, despite the TRF's confusing messages.
That seems to be the assessment, yes. Understanding that connection between TRF and Lati helps clarify the potential players.
Amidst all this horror, though, there were these incredible stories of local response, of bravery.
Absolutely. Kashmiris, local people, risking their own safety to help the injured tourists, offering shelter, comfort.
The pony handlers, right? They played a big part.
They did. Bisarin Valley has difficult terrain. Pony handlers used their animals, used makeshift stretchers, and rescued 11 injured people. Crucial effort.
And the Gurudwaras opening their doors.
Yes, a powerful symbol of solidarity, offering refuge to tourists who are fleeing or caught up in the chaos.
Emergency services responded quickly, too, airlifting the critical cases.
To the military hospital in Srinagar, yes. And a helpline was set up pretty fast for affected tourists and their families. It shows that capacity for compassion, even in the worst circumstances.
It really does. Now, the government and security response, that was pretty immediate and significant.
Very. Prime Minister Modi cut short an overseas visit, came back, chaired a meeting of the Committee on Security straight away.
And then came that major diplomatic move.
Suspending the Indus Waters Treaty with Pakistan. A huge step.
And they explicitly linked it to stopping cross-border terrorism, didn't they?
They did. The treaty manages river water sharing. It's been in place for decades. Suspending it signals a really serious escalation in tensions.
And it wasn't just the treaty. Other actions followed quickly.
Right. Closing the main border crossing with Pakistan. Banning travel for Pakistani nationals. Canceling existing visas.
Expelling military advisors, too.
Yes. Pakistani advisors in Delhi were expelled, and India withdrew its counterparts from Islamabad.
And tragically, just days later, border skirmishes were reported along the line of control.
Started around April 24th. It showed how quickly things could heat up on the ground after an event like this.
Meanwhile, the investigation was handed over to the NIA.
Yes, the National Investigation Agency, India's main counter-terror body. They sent teams to Pahalgam immediately.
And the local police released sketches?
Jammu and Kashmir police, yes, based on eyewitnesses. Those sketches seem to support the Leti link and the idea of foreign militants being involved.
Security reviews were announced too.
Yes, the army chief reviewed the situation. Plans for a security audit of tourist spots, potentially redeploying forces to boost protection in those areas.
But then there was this admission, potentially quite significant,
Which was?
that the authorities apparently didn't even know Bisarin Valley was open for tourists at that time.
Yes. That admission does raise serious questions about security protocols, coordination, potential lapses, really.
And intelligence agencies are reportedly looking into local collaborators.
Compiling a list, yes. Around 14 local individuals suspected of aiding the foreign attackers.
What's the thinking on why they hit this target? A relatively soft target compared to, say, a military base?
The assessment seems to be that the terrorists deliberately chose unarmed civilians because hitting heavily guarded security targets is much harder. They perhaps saw a window, maybe fewer security forces present at that specific time or location.
Exploiting a vulnerability.
Potentially. And there have also been reports, it's worth mentioning, about the Indian Army facing personnel shortages. Over 100,000 personnel down, partly due to pauses in recruitment during COVID and future reduction plans.
This could theoretically impact deployment strength in some areas.
It's a factor that could contribute to the overall security picture, yes. So you have this convergence. A vulnerable target, acknowledged potential security gaps, and maybe broader issues of force availability. It paints a complex and worrying picture.
The reactions beyond the immediate government response were also widespread.
Very much so. In Kashmir itself, the Jammu and Kashmir National Conference, a major local party, called for a ban, a general strike.
And was it widely observed?
Reports indicate yes, widespread participation, a strong signal of local condemnation of the violence.
And efforts were made to help the tourists leave.
Yes, airlines like Air India and Indigo put on extra flights.
Yeah.
And the Karnataka state government even arranged a special airlift for tourists from their state who were stranded.
But the way the attack was covered internationally, that caused some controversy.
It did. Some global media outlets were criticized, partly for terminology like using Indian-administered Kashmir, which India objects to.
And also for how they framed the victims.
Yes. Criticism that some reports didn't explicitly highlight the fact that Hindu victims were religiously targeted, leading to accusations of, well, downplaying or whitewashing that religious dimension.
It really highlights how language shapes the narrative, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The choice of words, the emphasis, it matters hugely in how people understand these events. Different outlets frame things differently, sometimes reflecting potential biases or editorial stances.
Domestically, though, condemnation was universal.
Oh yes, from the president, vice president, prime minister, across all major political parties. Widespread condemnation.
And internationally.
Strong condemnations, too. Neighboring countries, world leaders, the UN Secretary General, all spoke out against the attack.
What about Pakistan's reaction?
Officially, they denied any involvement. But they also issued warnings about potential escalation in the region.
Now, one of the really concerning ripple effects was reports of backlash against Kashmiris elsewhere in India.
Tragically, yes. Reports of heckling, harassment, even threats against Kashmiris living in other states.
Leading some students to actually go back home to Kashmir.
Yes, some felt unsafe and chose to return. There were also accounts of discrimination from landlords, shopkeepers.
And a far-right leader was arrested after protests related to this.
Yes, following protests by Kashmiri students who felt targeted. It just shows how quickly such an attack can fuel prejudice and division far from the actual site.
It really does, and if we connect this to broader themes, like those from social science perspectives.
It really exemplifies several major challenges. It's obviously political violence, terrorism, a direct threat to democratic stability.
And the aftermath, the reactions you just mentioned.
They highlight the persistent dangers of communalism, using religion to divide, and regionalism, creating suspicion between groups from different parts of the country.
The talk about security lapses points to
the absolute need for effective administration for responsive governance. Security is a fundamental state responsibility.
And the core issue of targeting based on religion.
It cuts right to the heart of secularism and social harmony, principles that are foundational to India's democracy. This attack challenges those very principles.
So the Pahalgam attack, it's clearly so much more than just a terrible news event that fades away.
Absolutely. It's a stark, disturbing reminder of the deep complexities in Kashmir, the fault lines that exist, and how they can be exploited with such tragic consequences.
You have the attack itself, the human response is both horrific and heroic, the political and diplomatic fallout, the different ways it's talked about globally.
Exactly. It serves as a really crucial, if sobering, case study for understanding contemporary challenges, terrorism, identity politics, security, media narratives.
And it really pushes us, I think, anyone listening, to think critically about the information we receive.
For sure. How is this event framed? What language is being used? Why might it be framed that way?
And how does something like this ultimately impact ordinary people? Not just in Pahalgam, but maybe Kashmiris living elsewhere, or just the general sense of security and trust across the country.
These are the vital questions, aren't they? Thinking about the real human impact, the societal impact.
This deep dive, looking at the sources, it's really just scratching the surface of these complex issues.
It is. There's always more to explore, more perspectives to consider.
We really encourage you, our listeners, to keep exploring, question the information, look for different viewpoints. What other questions does this raise for you? What do you think is the way forward, if any?
That informed understanding, that critical engagement, it's so important.
Absolutely. And look, if you found this kind of in-depth exploration valuable and maybe you aren't subscribed to the channel yet, please do consider hitting that subscribe button.
Yeah, we plan to keep bringing these deep dives, trying to get beyond the headlines on critical issues.
We're committed to providing context and analysis to help you stay informed and engaged. We've got more analyses like this planned that you really won't want to miss. Thanks for joining us.